And according to YouTube, I am live. Here I am, Gordon Gossi, as I always am. And if you've been watching my last few videos, which I've been uploading, pre-recording and uploading, I've dealt with Candy before them. So I haven't made her part of my uploaded videos, but she's always around and she's always expecting. On those uploaded videos, I give her a treat, but I do it before I start to record. So she's not included. But when I'm live, Candy is part of the show, as it were. So shake a paw. Wait, speak. Give me a good one. Speak. Come on. Oh, all she wants to do is chuff. Doesn't want to give me a good loud bark. But whatever the case, it is right now 9:51 p.m. on Thursday, the 15th of May. And I need to start off with an apology. The challenges of being a YouTube creator such as myself. There are a lot of YouTube creators out there, and I'm one of goodness knows probably 100,000. I don't know how many YouTube creators there are, and this is not my full-time job. I enjoy this. I like putting my thoughts, my views, and my opinions out there. I love sharing my faith, my Christian faith. This is the Bible opened to the gospel according to John, which I'm going to be covering tonight. Um, but I know that to gain followers, to gain views, to increase your footprint, it helps a lot to be consistent. It has been my aim. What I'm going to endeavor to do is to do a Bible-based live podcast style, whatever you want to call it, to do a video Wednesday nights at 9:30 p.m. Wednesday nights, focusing on the Bible. Call it a Bible study if you like, call it a sermon if you like, call it whatever you want. I'm not sure exactly what to call it, something along those lines, and to have it consistently on Wednesday nights at 9:30 p.m. because I know that helps. If people know, okay, it's Wednesday, it's 9:30. This is when Gordon Cosby does his Bible-based podcast thingy show, whatever you want to call it. But the difficulty when you're someone like myself, life gets busy. I'm married. Uh, I have a young son, 12, going to be 12, and I work sometimes long hours. Most of my shifts at work, I leave like 6:30 in the morning, 6:45, and I don't get home until after 4. Uh, I'm usually at work about 9 hours, and you can get tired. I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I'm coming up on 60. I'll be 59 this summer. And so it makes delivering that consistency a challenge. And so I'm going to do something very Christian, and I'm going to ask you to be forgiving. If you're watching this and you're one of my regular subscribers, I'm up over 1,200 now, which is amazing, and I appreciate it more than you can know. I'm a little surprised at the number is as high as it is, given that I don't have any real production values to speak of, just a simple laptop and the inboard camera and microphone. I don't have I don't have a big, opening segment with music and graphics and stuff like that. Just very bare bones basic. I like it that way, but at the same time, I know that having some, and I use the term production values, would probably help dress things up a bit and maybe attract some eyes. But I'm going to keep it bare bones basic, at least for the time being. My things can change, but this is where my thinking is right now. So thank you for tuning in. Sorry for the long preamble. But again, I appreciate everyone who has subscribed, all the commentary, a couple of my videos now, more recently, these uploaded videos that I'm doing, talking about current events, specifically a lot of it about the Canadian political scene, are gathering a lot of views. And now I'm going to be talking about faith. And I know that we don't live in a Christian world anymore. Uh, and I acknowledge that fully. And there's an old saying that says, if you want to know where you're going, you have to know where you have been. If you don't learn the lessons of the past, you're destined to, the mistakes of the past, you're going to repeat them if you don't learn the lessons. But to learn the lessons, you have to know your history. And I'm doing this video right now completely, 100% totally off the cuff. I have no notes prepared. The only written text I have in front of me are words that have been spoken and read for going on 2,000 years when we're talking about John's Gospel. And I want to start out with something that I only became aware of in the last year. In the last year or so, I only learned something. Many Christians will be familiar with the story of the woman caught in adultery. It starts in chapter 8 of John's Gospel. The woman caught in adultery, with Jesus just writing in the sand. And there is a common belief among Christians who are brought up going to church that everything being written here is what was written back 2,000 odd years ago. That 2,000 or so years ago, a man named John was witnessing certain events and that he was recording it. And then sometime thereafter, shortly thereafter, the copies of it started circulating around, and they've been passed down to us into the current day. And we read from John's Gospel, and there's a tendency amongst Christians to believe that these words were written down shortly after the events, within just a few short years of the events that are being described. And there is almost nobody today who believes that to be, in fact, true. And I'm talking about biblical scholars, people who do this for a living, guys with their PhDs in, biblical studies, theology, what have you. That hardly anyone believes that this was written very shortly after the events. The pervasive scholarly view is that John's Gospel, which I'll be reading from tonight, that it was written sometime in the latter part of the 1st century, that it was written decades after Jesus went to the cross, after his death and resurrection. Then this book was written down, put down into written form. And scholars debate the authorship. Some say it was the Apostle John. Some say it was a student of the Apostle John. Some say it was written in and around the year 90 AD, so that would be 60 or so years after Jesus went to the cross. Some say it was written 20, 30 years before that, maybe in 50 or 60 AD. But there is basically no one contending that it was written within a few short years after Jesus went to the cross. And likewise, what that part, the fact that the Gospels were written 20, 30, 40 years after Jesus went to the cross, I've been aware of that for a long time. But what I wasn't aware of is when it comes to this particular story of the woman caught in adultery, I always assumed that this was part of John's Gospel, that this was what John, or the first author of John's Gospel, whether it was John himself or one of his students, disciples, I just assumed this was in the original text. However, it is now widely held that this was added in later. And the reason for that is that the earliest copies we have of the Gospel of John that come from the 2nd century, so the year 100, 110, 120, 130. I don't know what the date is of the earliest physical copy we have of John's Gospel, and we probably don't have the whole thing, just excerpts, pieces, pages. But the earliest renditions we have do not include this story, do not include the story of the woman caught in adultery. And it was only in the 3rd century, sometime in the 3rd or 4th century, sometime in around the 300-400s, that this story was added in. Now, does that mean it didn't happen? And I'm here to say that I believe what we are about to read, that it actually did take place, and that it was passed around in oral tradition and then probably written down, but it did not belong to any of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And so what a scribe did later on, a couple hundred years later, is they took this, and I've heard it referred to as an orphan story. It didn't have a home. This recording of an incident at the temple with Jesus and a woman found in adultery. What a later scribe did 200, 300 years later is said, look, we need to give this passage a home because it's a very significant story. And so they tacked it on. They added it to John's gospel, and they decided to add it to a period where Jesus was confronting the Pharisees in the temple. I'm going to read now from chapter 7. I'm going to start in verse 45, more or less arbitrarily, just to give you a bit of the context and to explain. I'm going to read it I'm going to leave out the woman caught in adultery. I'm just going to read it as I believe it would have appeared, or roughly as it would have appeared in John's original gospel. Again, chapter 7, verse 45. The officers then went back to the chief priests and Pharisees, who said to them, why did you not bring him? Meaning, why didn't you bring Jesus here? The officers answered, no man ever spoke like this man. The Pharisees answered them, are you led astray, you also? Have any of the authorities of the Pharisees believed in him? But this crowd, who does not know the law, are accursed or accursed. Nicodemus, who had gone to him before, and was one of them, said to them, does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does? They, the other Pharisees, replied, are you from Galilee too? Search, and you will see no prophet is to arise from Galilee. They went each to his own house. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The Pharisees then said to him, you are being witness to yourself. Your testimony is not true. Jesus answered, even if I do bear witness to myself, my testimony is true. And then it goes on. I jumped from chapter 7, verse 53, from chapter 7, verse 53, all the way to chapter 7, verse 12. I left out the first 11 verses of chapter 8 because this is the section that is widely believed to have been cut and pasted in. Sharunian is here asking how I'm doing. I'm doing very well. Thank you for tuning in. And now I see I have 2 watchers. I love the live and interactive part of live videos. That's why I enjoy doing them. And so I'll invite you to fill up the comment field, you and whoever else shows up. Sharunian, you keep changing your name, but it's been Halfman has been part of it for a while, so at least I know who I'm talking to. And now I want to reread it. And this time I'll start in verse 51. I'm going to read it with the portion that was widely believed to be added in about the woman caught in adultery. This Nicodemus, where he says, does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does? They, the other Pharisees, replied, are you from Galilee too? Search, and you will see that no prophet is to arise from Galilee. They went each to his own house. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst When they put her right in the middle of the crowd, they said to him, to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law of Moses, now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such. What do you say about her?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, as sorry, as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the eldest. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus looked up to her and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No, no one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and do not sin again." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Um, I love this story, and it speaks to me about the foundation of the world in which we live. We are meant to be forgiving. The whole message, the whole gospel good news of Jesus Christ incarnating, coming down from glory, was to offer himself up as a living sacrifice for sin. And here we have a representation of that with a woman caught in adultery who has been brought before the judge, and Jesus does not condemn her. Am I going to suggest that the Western world, I talk often on my channel about how we live in the Western world, in a world that has at its basis a Judeo Christian ethic, a biblical ethic. And do we live up to it? No, never have, never will. But it's an aim, it's something to which we aspire, and we fall short. But there is certainly a benefit in setting one's aim toward that lofty goal. We are never going to achieve perfection, but we can try. Danny has shown up. Thank you for your email. Danny sent me an email. I forget, I don't know. I didn't look at the time that the email was sent, but was expecting me to be doing a video last night and watch the beginning of this video. I apologize. Life gets challenging and it makes it hard. I do enjoy these videos, but life is busy. And so I too, like the woman caught in adultery, am asking for forgiveness. And I know Danny is a very forgiving type. Um, Now, I did an earlier video where I asked the question about, is Canada becoming an Islamic country? And this is, to my mind, is an incredibly important question. While I admit fully that Canada has never lived up and been a true reflection, perfect reflection of a Christian society, that we have always failed and fallen short of that aim that we have toward being a godly nation. There's still value in aiming toward that goal. Is the Islamic world better or worse? And we have here set before us an example of a woman caught red-handed in the act of adultery. I assume what that means is that the Pharisees caught this woman in bed with a married man, or that she herself was married and that she was caught in bed with someone other than her husband. And the Pharisees, the scribes, the officials, they dragged her from this adulterous bed, and they dragged her into the temple court and brought her in front of Jesus, and they used it as a means to trap him. And how could they trap him? Well, number one, Jesus could say, let her go. Do not stone her. I forgive her. And then they would say to the people, they would say, this man, Jesus of Nazareth, he repudiates the law of Moses. And so let's get him. Let's hand him over to the Romans so that they can kill him. Because in Roman occupied first century Judea, only the Romans could execute. It was only they that could carry out the punishment, a punishment that involved execution. Conversely, Jesus could say, yeah, let's get the stones, let's go, let's fulfill this law of Moses. And then again, now they could hand him over to the Roman authorities and say, this man is executing a death sentence that is reserved in first century Roman occupied Judea. That's the job of the Romans. So we're handing him over for breaking Roman law. Seems like almost a no-win position. If Jesus says, stoner, they've got him. If Jesus says, forgive her, they've got him. Either way, it's a heads they win, tails Jesus loses. And Danny is saying that, and I'll populate it to the screen with respect to the question of whether or not Canada is becoming an Islamic state, an Islamic country. He's saying we're headed down that road, or it certainly seems. And the reason we're heading down that road is because Canadians have rejected the Judeo-Christian roots of our society. And so when you have a body, a group of people with no defining core ethic, another group that does have a core defining group ethic will win the day because they have something around which they're unified. And in the broader Canadian culture is go whatever way you want. You can go left, you can go right, you can go straight, you can go backward, you can stay where you are. We're scattered. And then you have an Islamic group coming in, and they are far more adherent to their faith than Christians are. And Danny goes on to say that the number of Christians today, as opposed to when I was a child, is sad. We used to be a Christian country, not so much anymore. Churches are empty, mosques are full. And then he goes on to say mea culpa, which is a Latin expression that means guilty as charged. And I'm taking that to mean that you are guilty of it as well. So am I. There's that old admonition from Jesus that Christians are to look at the log in our own eye before we point out the speck in another eye's. In my own live messages, that's the problem. When I use StreamYard, I have to open up YouTube as well. I have to have both, and then I have to switch it on YouTube, not on StreamYard, but I'm going to do that now. But when I go a little slower when I'm have multiple programs running like StreamYard and so there may be a little echo going right now. Top chat, live chat. There, I now have it on live chat. There. So I am now on live messages. Thank you for that, Danny, for that reminder. And sorry for the digression, everyone. But it is important. I don't like to miss messages. If someone takes the time to write something, I don't want YouTube deciding, well, we're not going to populate that to the message field. I want to see it all. Having a drink of my coffee. So let me get my thoughts back together with respect to the story here of the woman caught in adultery. What happened? Why? I was speaking about the fact that Jesus was in pretty much a no-win position. If he said, stone the woman, adhere to the law of Moses, then the scribes, the Pharisees, could have dragged Jesus before the Romans and said he's executing a death sentence, and under Roman law, he's breaking the law, because in first century Roman occupied Judea, only the Romans could prosecute a death sentence against someone. So he loses there. If he says forgive her, then they can turn around to the people and say this man repudiates the law of Moses, upon which our entire culture is based. So he's not the Messiah. And Jesus, rather, what he does is he's kneeling down. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," is how many people will. I think it's written that way in differing translations. Let he who is amongst you without sin, let him cast the first stone. And a big question that theologians have argued for centuries, probably as soon as this thing got committed to paper, is what was Jesus writing in the ground? And Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus was there at the beginning when the world was created. Jesus is all knowing, all seeing, all wise. The interpretation I most ascribe to, that I like the best, is that Jesus knew the names of everyone who was standing there with the woman found in adultery, and he knew their sins. And so I believe he was writing down their names and their sins. That woman was not the only woman caught, or rather, was not the only woman or only person guilty of adultery in that room. Guilty of adultery, guilty of theft, guilty of pride, guilty of bearing false witness. And I imagine the interpretation I ascribe to is that Jesus, my opinion, he was probably writing down the names with his finger in the sand of the individuals making the accusations and the sins of which they were guilty. And the oldest recognized his name first and left, and then the next oldest and the next oldest, and right down to the youngest, and they all left. So then there was no one left to accuse her, no one there to witness Jesus's gift of grace, of forgiveness that he offers to us as well. But with this, and this is the ideal to which we are to aim in the Christian world, this Judeo-Christian ethic that we profess toward, that we never live up to, but at least we profess to it and we aim toward it. What would happen in the Islamic world? Do they have this same ethic about forgiveness? No. Look at countries like Saudi Arabia. Look at countries like Iran. Look at nations that follow strict observance of one thing called Sharia law, where public floggings, where someone found guilty of theft has a hand cut off or a leg cut off. Is this the type of world we want to live in? And I think this message has a lot of bearing in today's world. We are to be forgiving. Look at the log in our own eyes before pointing out the speck in another's eyes. These men who brought this woman forward were not without sin themselves. And what is Shrunian writing? Oh, Gordon is a straight heterosexual white Christian man. Okay, I don't know what to do with that, Shrunian. I like what Danny's writing. He always writes this on pretty much all my live streams. Jesus is king, and he is. Should bring up one other frequent point that's brought up by many commentators when they talk, sermonizers. theologians when they talk about this passage, the Mosaic law, and that's just another way to say the law of Moses. Mosaic means attached to Moses. So the Mosaic law actually called, in the case of adultery, for both the man and the woman to be brought before the authorities, not simply one of the two. And they say in here, teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Well, if they caught her in the very act of adultery, then she had a partner in crime. Where is he? Was he amongst the crowd watching? It's worth wondering about. Was he about to watch his lover potentially be stoned to death? Was his name written down in the sand? Did Jesus write down his name in the sand and write down adultery next to it, showing that the religious authorities, these scribes and Pharisees, that they were not fulfilling the Mosaic law that required both individuals caught in the act of adultery to be brought forward for stoning? Why did they only bring forth one? And we need to get back to our Judeo-Christian roots if we are going to navigate the times that are coming, because we're going to be faced with some difficult choices in the I'm convinced it's months and years ahead. I think it's staring us right in the face. I don't think it's going to be long. I don't know how long it's going to take. It could be weeks away, months away, and I think it's going to be incremental, boiling the frog, just turning up the temperature a little bit at a time. So let's see what's being written. Danny's asking, think we'll ever end up with Sharia law? Muslims are making babies. We are not. In that video where I talked about Canada becoming an Islamic state, I mentioned that the fertility rate among Islamic Canadians, Muslim Canadians, that the fertility rate in that community is up, I believe, around 2.33 is the number that comes to my mind. I'm not going to go back and check it right now. So 2.33, which is greater than what a population needs to grow its population. If a fertility rate is at 2.1, the population will remain roughly steady. It won't grow, but it won't decline either at 2.1. At 2.33, that population is going to increase. And then you throw in immigration with it, and with so much of the immigration coming into Canada being from countries that are Islamic, a lot of African nations, Sudan, Morocco, Ethiopia, to say nothing of the Middle East, obviously. These are Islamic parts of the world. Got a lot of immigrants coming in, and they're joining in with an existing Islamic community, some who were immigrants, some who were born here, and the population is growing. In the last 20 or so years, from 2001 to 2021, the population of people who identify as Muslim in Canada tripled, and they now represent 5% of the overall population. However, Canada's native-born population is only growing. The fertility rate for Canada writ large, the entire population, is only 1.33. We are far below what is needed to maintain the population. So the only way Canada's population grows is through immigration. And with so much of that immigration coming from Islamic countries, Indonesia, Pakistan, North Africa, the Middle East, with so many people coming in from Islamic countries, that population is going to grow larger and larger. And stories like this of Jesus confronting the woman caught in adultery they're not being taught now. They're not being taught now. Our church, as Danny noted, our churches are largely, in a lot of cases, they're empty. When I'm 58, born 1966, when I was young, growing up both in Canada and the United States, in late 60s, early 70s, when a family would move into a neighborhood, if that family did not go to church, tongues would cluck. People would say that that family that moved in 2 houses down, they don't go to church. And it was not a good thing. Now it's the reverse. Now a family moves into a neighborhood, and if they're heading to church at 9, 10, 11 o'clock, whatever it is on a Sunday, people look at them sideways and go, those guys go to church. Like, what a bunch of losers. And we wonder why crime is on the rise, why we're living in a society that uh, a large part of the population applauds parents who raise a child, and they give their blessing to that child having radical surgery, surgery that mutilates healthy organs and tissue. And people say, oh, you're doing such a great job, right? Raising your child. You just mutilated their body. Good for you. You're such a wonderful person. This is the world that we have evolved in. Now, that's not to say that not everyone, thankfully, not everyone applauds parents who raise a child to be gender confused and then has that child subjected to castration, double mastectomy, surgeries that basically ensure they have no life beyond their own, that mutilates healthy organs and tissue. That should be a crime. But instead, rather than in our upside down world, rather than it being the crime that it should be, in many circles, it's applauded. Wonderful job getting your child's healthy tissue destroyed. You're a great parent. Talk about a crazy upside down world, to say nothing of being a forgiving society, of extending grace. Instead, we're confronted with an ideology that is the antithesis of offering grace and forgiveness, but rather chops off hands, that administers lashes to people in public. Forget forgiveness. One can have their views on homosexuality and sex outside of the confines of marriage, but no one in the West, hardly anyone, will you hear anyone advocate that a homosexual be thrown off a building, as happens in so much of the Islamic world. No one suggests the death penalty for someone who succumbs to same-sex attraction. And yet, this is the world that we live in. Canada, what used to be a Judeo-Christian country, that's pulled up the anchor on our Judeo-Christian roots, and now we're sailing into Islamic waters, to use a bit of a ship metaphor. Let's see what's being written. Sharunian, or Pathman Allegiance, saying that Vishnu, I know Vishnu is Hindu, a Hindu god, and I can't pronounce the other, I know Ganesha is, are paradigms of, they're not, I think you're using the wrong word, they're not paradigms, but they do have echoes within Christianity. The admonition to do unto others as you would do unto yourself, do unto others, is not unique to Christianity. God's laws are written on our hearts, and they manifest themselves in many different faiths. In Hinduism, Buddhism, even in Islam, there are elements of that core godly message there. But Christianity is differentiated from other world religions because in Christianity, we do not earn our salvation. Rather, it is a gift from God. It is it's through grace alone that humanity is reconciled to a perfect and holy God. Whereas in pretty much every other faith of which I'm aware, it's all on you. You have to, because I believe, because I had faith, because I did this, because I am continuing. These are the reasons that you come into glory, into paradise, into heaven, how you reconcile yourself to a perfect and holy God. In Christianity, it's not because I did this, because I'm continuing. No, it's because he. It's only because of him. I did nothing. The wages of sin are death. And yet, because he, the sinless Savior, went to the cross, because of him, I am reconciled. He paid the penalty that I deserved. And with respect to talking about the woman caught in adultery, takes two to tango. Why did they only bring the woman forward? Why didn't they bring the man forward? Um, and Sharunian's writing something about wanting to go to Algeria. That's another North African country. Um, France is now largely an Islamic country. Certainly, the major urban centers have become very Islamic. Toronto is becoming very Islamic. We're seeing protests, and we're seeing highway overpasses and major intersections blocked as people make their Islamic observance of bowing 5 times a day to Mecca, which is one of the pillars of Islam. I don't know all the pillars of Islam, but one, some of them are good. One is to give alms, give money to the poor. Nothing wrong with that. Another is to bow to Mecca 5 times a day. Another is that if you are able, you are to make a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is the site I don't know enough of the full story, but it's a great big rock, and the Hajj, that's the pilgrimage, and they all walk, they circumvent or circumscribe, or well, they walk around. I forget the right word, circumnavigate, I guess, this great big rock. And it's believed that Muhammad slept against this rock, and that he received angelic revelation. God, I'm having trouble with my words right now. So what is Danny writing? Muslims don't have the problems whites do because they don't fall for the gay trans agenda. It's haram, sin. It's an abomination. Haram is kind of, I take it to be the equivalent of the English word abomination, which some Christians will use that word, especially fundamentalist evangelical preachers. They love that word abomination. And personally, I wish Christian fundamentalist evangelical preachers would tone it down a notch. Quite often they want to appeal to the emotion of their audience, and they want to, so it's an abomination. It's haram, is what they say in Islam. Most gays and trans people don't make babies, they adopt them. True. But one point I will make is that Islam, Muslims, it's not racial. You're not, you can be white and be Islamic. You can be a white Muslim. There's no issue with it. You can be white, black, Middle Eastern. You can be Pakistani. Pakistan has 200, I think there are 275 million people. That's a predominantly Islamic country. Indonesia has the largest population of Muslims in the world, and they're Asian. So, it's not white, black, Asian, or anything like that. And Danny goes on to say whites to be read as non-Muslim, but whites can be Muslim. Cat Stevens, a singer-songwriter, and I love his music. He changed his name to Yusuf Ben Islam. He is a Muslim now. And as a matter of fact, when the fatwa or religious decree came from the Ayatollahs in Iran that Salman Rushdie should be killed as a heretic for writing the satanic verses, Pat Stevens, now called Yusuf Ben Islam, is on record as saying that he supported that fatwa and that a good Muslim should. And it only came out, it's within the last year, within the last 7-8 months. I don't know exactly how long ago it was, but someone did attack and try to kill Salman Rushdie on the basis of that old fatwa, that old religious decree that came from the Iranian Ayatollahs. And Danny, yeah, the paradigm might not have been the best word. Danny thinks Sharunian probably meant parallel. And I would agree. Parallel would be a better word in my estimation. Don't want to speak for Sharunian, but I do that. I think we all do that on occasion. Sometimes you can't think of, I've done it a couple times in this video talking about circumnavigating the Hodge, that rock, and circum something, that big rock. At least I didn't say circumcising. So that's about as much as I wanted to put out there. But I also wanted to draw attention to the fact, because I'm afraid that what happens in our churches is that people come away believing things that are false, such as that this story of the woman caught in adultery, that this John wrote this, and it's in the Bible, and it's the word of God. I mean, I end my biblical passages most of the time, I will say, this is the word of the Lord, thanks be to God. And so people will come away and they go, well, John wrote this however many years after Jesus went to the cross. The Apostle John, or someone writing on his behalf, wrote it down, and that story was in there. And then they find out and they see the scholarship behind it, and they go, wait, this was added in 200-300 years after by a scribe. So what you've been teaching me is a lie. And then they reject the gospel, the entire gospel. They reject everything. We expect perfection. And when we find out things are less than perfect, then there's a tendency to want to tear everything down. I've spoken many times about, perfect is the enemy of the good. And I get into trouble. I get into disagreements with fellow brothers and sisters in Christ who insist on holding up the ideal of the Bible as being 100% totally perfect, the Word of God, wholly inspired. Everything that's in here is exactly as God ordained it. And so to suggest that there is a contradiction anywhere in the Bible, they're anathema to it. No, there are no contradictions. The Bible has no contradictions because it's perfect. It has to be perfect. But what that does is that when you get a person, they get into a weak point where they're struggling and their faith is being questioned, and then someone hits them with information they were never taught before, that was never acknowledged before by a pastor or a priest or a minister or a reverend from the pulpit. And they say, oh my gosh, they've been lying to me. They've been lying to me. And this person over here is telling me the truth now. Now I know the truth. And they walk away from the saving, the salvation of Jesus Christ. They turn their back on it. And Christians, we got to look ourselves in the eye. I like what Danny is writing. Only God is perfect. And it's an unpopular view in evangelical, what I'll call fundamentalist circles, to suggest that these books were written by human hands. Godly inspired, yes, but human hands nonetheless. We are a fallen creature. We are the creation. We are not the creator. And so while it is inspired, I often come back to the point and I ask the question, how many women went to the empty tomb? Was it one? Was it two? Was it three? Or was it 3 plus? An indeterminate number larger than 3. Well, it depends which gospel you read. And I don't remember exactly, I've gone through it before. But when you read John's gospel, now on the first day of the week, this is John chapter 20. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. So in John's gospel, it is only Mary who has gone to the open or the empty tomb on the first day of the week, on Sunday morning. Mary came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Not Mary and someone else, just Mary. It's the only one mentioned. Now, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Let's go to Luke. What does Luke say? So, according to John, Mary, only Mary. Was it Mary Magdalene? I think it was. Let's be clear. Mary Magdalene. Only one mentioned. Let's go to Luke. I have to look. I haven't. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices which they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men stood by them in dazzling apparel, and as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, why do you seek the living among the dead? Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be sacrificed. And on the third day he will rise. And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. So according to John, Mary Magdalene went to the empty tomb. No one else, just Mary Magdalene. According to Luke, it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the disciples, or apostles rather. So now we have Luke saying that it's Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and other women. So some number greater than 5. That's Luke. What does Mark say? Well, Mark says, chapter 16, and when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. So now we have Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome. So now we have 3 women going to the empty tomb. So if you ask the question, how many women went to the empty tomb on the first day of the week after Jesus had gone to the cross? How many women went to the tomb? Each account is contradicting the other accounts. It's giving a different version. Does that mean that the tomb wasn't empty? No, they all agree on that. So we know that a woman or women went to the tomb and the tomb was empty. I don't have an issue in saying that when it comes to how many women went to the empty tomb, that the gospel accounts contradict one another because they all give a different story as to the number of women. And this is where I find, especially when we're teaching our young people, if we don't point out these, call them inconsistencies, if you will, that in later life, when kids get older and they're confronted with this information, they are amazed. I was never taught that. It's there in black and white. What does Matthew say? Now, chapter 28. Now, after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the sepulchre, the tomb, sepulchre, tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came down and rolled back the stone and sat upon it. One account, we had two angelic type figures. Now we have one, and we only have 2 women. And this is why when I talk about this story of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery, and having been, I believe, it was an authentic teaching, an authentic account of something that really happened, but it wasn't in John's original gospel. And a later scribe said, this is an important teaching. It needs a home. So let's carve a spot. We'll stick it right at the end of chapter 7 and into chapter 8. We'll just break it up and we'll insert it in there. That's what I believe. Um, oh, wait a minute. Now, this I may have to push back on you. Danny is saying that even Jesus was imperfect. No, I don't believe so. I have an issue with that. To be the Paschal sacrifice, to be that Passover lamb, Jesus had to be perfect, without blemish, without sin. Otherwise, the sacrifice, it had to be a perfect sacrifice. Cryptomeria says that fig tree had it coming. Jesus, I forget the exact context, but Jesus was walking by a fig tree and it had no figs on it. And so he cursed it. And later that same day or that evening, when Jesus and the disciples came back, they found that fig tree that Jesus had cursed had withered up and died. Um, and Stranger in a Strange Land is asking the question I was asking, Danny. Well, Jesus is God. How was Jesus imperfect? Uh, and Danny is writing, well, God came to earth in human form as Jesus, thus he was a man. Therefore, he could be imperfect, couldn't he? No. No, Jesus is the Word made flesh. When we read the start of John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, he being Jesus. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So everything, heaven and earth, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Jesus was there at the beginning. Everything that was made with him. And nothing, it's a little bit of an unwieldy sentence in modern English. Without him was not anything made that was made. So everything we can see, everything God created, that Jesus was part of that. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus is the Word made flesh. And Danny's saying, thank you for the clarification. I get it now. I once heard a sermon, and I remember it was at the United Church. And Ken, the pastor, who I learned a lot from his sermons, but at one point, he talked about the woman who Jesus was sitting at table, and a Canaanite woman came before him, and she asked for a healing for her daughter, this Canaanite woman. And Jesus said to the woman, this Canaanite woman, I came only for the children of Israel. Is it right to feed the dogs? He basically called this Canaanite woman a dog. And then to finish the passage, Jesus said something, I don't remember the exact words, but the woman then said, even a dog will take the scraps that fall from the master's table. And then Jesus, amazed, says, because of your faith, it is done as you wish, because you have faith. And this pastor at the United Church, Ken, and again, like him, but he said he thought that Jesus was having a bad day calling this woman a dog. I don't view it that way. Do not view it that way at all. I don't think Jesus was having a bad day. Jesus came for the children of Israel, God's covenant chosen people. He extended his message, it was for everyone, but that was to come later. But even the Roman who came before him and said that my servant boy is at the point of death, and I know that you have authority. And Jesus healed his servant. So, but It doesn't mean that Jesus was having a bad day. And Denny's saying, I didn't realize Jesus was there at the very beginning of creation. Yeah, fair enough. This is the thing. I don't like to assume too much biblical knowledge on the part of viewers of my live streams because, and let's face it, there's tons in the Bible that I don't know. And so I don't like to assume knowledge, especially in this post-Christian world that we live in. And we're talking about 66 books that take a long time to go through. And so, I know more than most because most people don't go to church at all and have never read the Bible. I've read it cover to cover. I'm going through it again cover to cover. That section right there, the woman caught in adultery, I've probably read that in the course of my lifetime, 15, 20, maybe more times. But I wanted to be sure that I've read every portion of the Bible at least once, and now I know I have, and I'm going through it again. So I'm going to end my video there. I do have more things to say about the current times that we're living in and the challenges we're going to be facing. I'm scripting out one now that I'll be uploading in a day or two. I might finish the scripting of it tonight. This video, I did it completely off the cuff with no prepared notes aside from what I read in the Bible itself. These are the best prepared notes you're ever going to find, human hands or otherwise. And Denny's writing Cassius. Well, don't confuse the chosen with biblical truth. Dallas Jenkins and the creators and the writers of The Chosen, they use a lot of what I will call poetic license. They try to take things and make them plausible. I think it was Gaius is the name of the character in The Chosen, who they have him going before Jesus and asking for a healing of his servant, but then they add in that the servant is actually his son, that he, had slept with a servant or a slave. And so this child is not just his servant, but it's also his son. That's not in the Bible. Now, is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. It might even be probable, but it's not in the Bible itself. It's like The Chosen takes liberties, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, to to flesh out a story so that you can make an or however many seasons they're going to have. They've got 5 in the books right now. So you're going to have, multiple episodes. Well, you need to flesh things out and you need to give backstories. What was Peter like before he met Jesus? What was he like? And was he a gambler? The Bible doesn't say he was a gambler, but in The Chosen, they depict Peter as a gambler and a fighter and as a schemer and as very brash. Now, historically, can we prove that that happened? No. There's nothing in the Bible that tells us that Peter, who originally was called Simon, there's nothing that tells us he gambled or got into fights or anything like that. However, what the creators of The Chosen have done is they've looked at what we do know about Peter's personality, and we know he was a bold guy. In the account where Jesus is walking on the water, Peter's the one who says, "If it is you, Lord, bid me come. If it is you, Jesus, call me and I'll come out to you." And Jesus says, "It is I." And Peter jumps out of the boat. He's bold. We know that. When Jesus and the disciples were sitting outside of Caesarea Philippi, and Jesus asked, who do men say that I am? They say, some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Elijah, some say a prophet. And then Jesus says, who do you say I am? And Peter is, you are the Christ, you are the Son of the living God. And then at the Last Supper, during the Passover meal, the Seder, Jesus says that soon the Son of Man will be handed over and will be given up, and he will be crucified, he will be killed. And Peter says, no, you won't. I'll die before I let that happen. So we have this impression of Peter as very bold and brash and first to speak and first to act. That's the impression we have of him from the Gospels. So what Dallas Jenkins and the creators of The Chosen, the writers have done is they said, okay, what was he like before? Well, we don't have anything to go on, but might he have been a gambler? Yeah, that's possible. It's not, I'm sure there was gambling in first century Roman occupied Judea. So let's have him as a gambler. It fits his personality type. Getting into fights, yeah, seems like it would be in character based on what we know, but we don't. So I hope you understand what I'm talking about in terms of The Chosen. You have to be careful with it. It is not scripture. What's great about The Chosen is it leads people to investigate. One of the things about Simon Peter is in the show The Chosen, they depict him as being married. And I even had to say, wait a minute, is Peter married? So what do? I go and I check and I find out, well, we do know that Jesus healed Peter's Simon Peter's mother-in-law. Well, if he had a mother-in-law, then he had a wife. So it's reasonable to assume that Simon Peter was married. Now, is there anything in there about Simon Peter's life with his wife? No, there's not. There has been biblical scholarship suggests that Peter was probably widowed, that his wife had passed away, but we don't know. It's not in the Bible. So Simon. So Dallas Jenkins and the writers, creators of The Chosen, they've tried to flesh out a story to make compelling viewing. And the great thing about it is it's leading lots of people to check and open their Bibles and to read. Was Matthew really a tax collector? Yes, he was. But now people are checking and they're finding out, okay, they've added on the woman at the well, where Jesus says, you're right when you say you have no husband, for you have had, I forget, 4 husbands, and the man you are with now is not your husband. They added dialogue to that beyond what is merely in what is in the text of the Gospel of John. And what is Stranger in a Strange Land is writing, his name is Emmanuel. Translation, God with us. I usually see it spelled with an E. And Shrunyan wrote something to which Danny is saying, I am one of them. And, oh, very good. Shrunyan says that he has 16 subscribers, yet most of it is token. And Danny's one of them. And Shrunyan saying 52 subscribers. I should make sure I subscribe to all you guys. Let me know your stations and I'll make sure I subscribe because I know the names don't always line up. What your name is here in the live chat is different in the comment field. It's a different name. Like my name sometimes is English Frog, which is an old email address I had based on the fact that I'm an Anglophone, English, and I speak French, Frog. And hey, let's all try and grow our channels. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for watching. The usual like, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. Fill the comment field. You know the drill. And I'll end it the way I always do. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord grant you peace. I will be uploading a video in the next day or so, scripted out, something I'm writing. I've written about half of it. But this one goes into deep detail about why I do not think we should be trusting Mark Carney. We should be trusting in no one but Christ alone, especially with the times coming forward now. But I find that Mark Carney is being foisted on us almost like Anthony Fauci was, as here's the guy who will provide all the answers. And I have definite misgivings about what's coming. The Liberals have just announced they're not going to drop a budget. So they're not going to lay out the spending plans that they have. They're just going to go on an ad hoc basis. It's just going to come down from on high. Trust us. And I don't trust Mark Carney. I don't trust anyone of the. I don't trust Pierre Polyev either. Faith alone in Christ alone. So God bless. I'll leave Danny to have the last word. Amen and amen. Good night, y'all. And again, I apologize about yesterday. I'm going to try and keep this to Wednesdays, 9:30 p.m., faith-based. And then Saturday nights, have another live stream where I talk about recap the news of the day. Let's see. I'm not going down that road. Trust Christ, but there are two Christ. Do you know the difference? I think you're talking about Christ and the Antichrist, and it's going to be difficult. Even the deception is going to become. Your feet have got us firmly beyond the rock, and we got to put on the armor of God to be able to discern. Cryptomeria says thank you, and God bless. I'm going to end it now. All right. Good night, all. We'll see you soon.